Okay, good evening, everyone. We are on the campus of Columbia University, and so when I teach my classes, I like to feel the energy, so we're going to start all over again. Good evening, everyone. Okay, now we're set to learn. Okay, properly. My name is Jason Wingard. I'm the Dean of the School of Professional Studies here at Columbia University. Welcome to the second Community Scholars Lecture of the year. We're glad to have you here today. Today, the program that we're talking about, this Community Scholars Program, is a partnership between the School of Professional Studies and the Office of Government and Community Affairs here at Columbia University. The purpose is to connect the cultural and intellectual community here in northern Manhattan. The benefits are many, but really it enables scholars here in this community to participate and realize the aspirations of the research that they want to do, the learning that they want to do, while using and benefiting from the resources here at Columbia University by taking classes, using the library, any other resources. So we're really proud of this program. Here in the room, we have many people here, faculty from Columbia University, we have staff, we have our community partners, community neighbors. So once again, we're glad to see you here today. I want to take a few minutes to acknowledge a few people. David Madigan, Executive Vice President of Columbia University, thank you for being here. Also, Geraldine Downey, thank you for your support. Geraldine is the Director of the Center for Justice and a faculty member here, and thank you to all of the members of the Center for Justice who are here today. From the Office of Government and Community Affairs, we have Maxine Griffin, Executive Vice President. Thank you for your support and for being here. We have Flores Forbes and Karen Jewett, also from the Office of Government and Community Affairs. Thank you both for being here as well. From the School of Professional Studies, we have Marilyn Cohn, who's the Institutional Advancement Associate Dean at SPS, George Calderero, Director of Community Relations at SPS, and then our events team for setting this all up. Thank you very much for all of your efforts. So, Reverend Vivian Nixon, before I introduce her, I want to highlight one thing. The title of her talk, I'm going to say it twice. The title of her talk, Voices from Inside America's Mass System of Punishment, the Freeing Power of Higher Education. Okay, once again, Voices from Inside America's Mass System of Punishment, the Freeing Power of Higher Education. So this is a wonderful place here on the campus of a renowned higher education institution for us to talk about this freeing power. So we're excited to have her here. And before I introduce her, once again, I want to underscore a couple of points. So the first point, the United States incarcerates too many people. And that's with a period, not with a question mark. The United States incarcerates too many people. I just had the privilege of watching the documentary. It didn't win the Oscar for documentary films, but 13. I'm sure many of you have seen the documentary 13. And I was also reviewing and preparing for tonight Hillary Clinton's comments when she was on campus 2 years ago, where she focused on this topic a bit. A couple of statistics here. So the US is less than 5% of the world's population, yet 25% of the world's prison population is owned by the US. So we account for 25% of the world's prison population, but only have 5% of the world's prison population. The incarceration rates here in the United States are significantly higher than they were 30, 40 years ago, even though crimes that are being committed in the United States are way down. So crime rates are way down, committed crimes are way down, but incarceration rates way up. And then the racial disparities are quite significant as well with respect to incarceration. The NAACP has said that the incarceration rates for blacks is 6 times that for whites. And in fact, if the trends continue, now listen to this, if the trends continue, 1 in 3 black males, if they are born today, will find themselves doing some prison time during their life. 1 in 3. So that's pretty pronounced. Second point of 3 that I want to make. There's no justifiable reason for these statistics and why things are happening the way they are with incarceration, the trends and disparities. But if you were asked, here's a couple. There's been a significant outgrowth affecting incarceration because of the war on drugs in the 1980s, particularly incarcerating lots of offenders for possession of crack cocaine and other drugs. Some of the political decisions that have been made by the government, particularly those giving power to prosecutors at the local level, Okay, and so that's contributed significantly to incarceration as well. A lack of support for at-risk youth, and so we're all aware of in the community a lack of libraries, a lack of mentoring, lack of sports programs, other educational outlets, leads to incarceration. The common theme is that there's really no benefits to incarceration. Society is not safer. It's been proven through research that society is not better. So a question that is asked and will be answered tonight is, so why are we incarcerating so many people? The third point and final point that I want to make is that education has a critical role to play in addressing these issues and these themes. And again, what better place than to be here at Columbia to talk about it. Victor Hugo, many of you know Victor Hugo if you remember your English classes. He was a 19th century French writer, very famous writer. And he said the quote, which is really applicable to tonight, "He who opens a school door closes a prison." He who opens a school door closes a prison. So education and the power of it, that's a perfect quote. The Center for Justice here at Columbia, I mentioned earlier, Dr. Geraldine Downey and her staff have done a lot of work. They've come up with some statistics that actually prove what college education can do to reduce incarceration. So it reduces recidivism, which is a fancy word for saying, reoffender. So when people are released from prison, education can actually prevent them from going back to jail. It increases employment opportunities. That's obvious, the benefit that that creates. And then it also strengthens communities. So by strengthening the community, by educating people to help them get jobs, by giving them outlets so that they don't return to prison, is all significant, and those are tremendous benefits from higher education. We at the School of Professional Studies have a strong commitment to access, so all kinds of population, including the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. We all in this room today can act. Instead of just talking about it, we're acting by being here tonight, by engaging in this dialogue. There will be an opportunity for questions and answers afterwards, so get your questions ready so that you can line up in front of the mics between the two aisles and ask your questions, but that kind of participation and engagement is really what we need. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Reverend Vivian Nixon, our keynote speaker for the evening. She's the Executive Director of the College and Community Fellowship, CCF. CCF is an organization committed to removing barriers to higher education for women, specifically who are involved in the justice system in a variety of ways. Reverend Nixon joined CCF as a peer educator herself while incarcerated, so she knows the organization well and has been involved for quite some time. She's the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships recognizing her work, too many to mention right now. She's an ordained minister in the African American Episcopal Church, the AME Church, and she's a member of our first cohort of the Community Scholars back in 2013. So she knows this program well and is a shining recipient and an example of what this program can really do. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Reverend Nixon, and please join me in welcoming her yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So a lot of you in this room know me, and you know that I don't scare easy. But this is a pretty awesome space to be speaking in. And I'd like to thank everyone that Dean Wingard thanked, but in particular, I'd like to thank the School of Professional Studies here at Columbia and the Department of Governmental Affairs for this great invitation. And George Calderaro has been absolutely indispensable in making this happen, so I want to personally thank you for all of your help and support in getting this done. But because this talk is going to be a lot about my journey and the voices of the women that I care so much about, who are currently on the outside, but some still on the inside, I can't start without thanking a whole bunch of other people who have been so instrumental in bringing me to a place in my life where I'm asked to do something as awesome as speak to all of you today. I have to thank the team that works with me at College and Community Fellowship, we call CCF. They are amazing, and they make that program meaningful for every member of the community that we serve. I want to thank our board of directors for their support. From the time I was a student involved with CCF through my employment at CCF, they have been instrumental in helping me grow in ways that I never imagined. The Columbia Community Scholars Program was a big deal for me, and I know that the West Harlem Development Corporation had a lot to do with that work. Columbia University has many other entities that have partnered with CCF for various things, including the Center for Justice. Thank you so much, Geraldine. And the Center for Institutional and Social Change at the law school. Those partnerships have meant so much to our organization. But most of all, I can't ignore the meaning that I have found in the community of alumni and fellows at College and Community Fellowship. And some of you are here tonight, and your friendship and support has meant so much to me these 17 years. And I hope that I can give voice to why you think education is a freeing activity and also can help lead to a decarceration movement that is filled with leaders who understand firsthand what it means to have been a participant in our system of mass punishment. The title of my talk, as the dean mentioned, is Voices from Inside America's Mass System of Punishment. America's system of punishment has links to race, class, gender, political suppression, and religion. And I want to briefly summarize those because I believe that the complexity of mass incarceration is something that often misses us. I've been to dozens of talks that focus on the racial disparity, dozens of talks that focus on the plight of women incarcerated, talks that focus on poverty or religion, but for me to deal with it outside of the complexity of the interactions of all of those things is to not deal with the problem in its entirety. So I just want to talk a little bit about all that complexity before I talk about why I feel higher education is such a freeing element. To give you some context for my ideas around these issues, which are not based on traditional research, but on my own experience and the experience of those who I'm close to, it is important to share with you a bit of my personal journey. I grew up in a very wealthy community on the North Shore of Long Island. My family was working class. We lived in close proximity to wealthy families, usually to serve as domestics and laborers to meet the needs of our more affluent neighbors. My great-great-grandmother was a midwife to the Rockefeller and Guggenheim families. My parents were actively involved in the civil rights movement and believed that success meant a well-paying job with good benefits and a retirement plan. And because they were involved in the civil rights movement and experienced the passage of the Civil Rights Act, that generation, my parents, my aunts, my uncles, and our neighbors, largely trusted that the passage of the Civil Rights Act meant equality. As a result, they developed what some have dubbed a bootstrapper mentality. Among the many definitions are this one: bootstrapper, to advance or develop by initiative and effort with little or no assistance, as in, she bootstrapped herself to the top. The rhetoric of the bootstrapper is grounded in privilege, in that it presumes that one has boots, and that those boots have straps. Furthermore, it is devoid of contextual relationship to the wealth passed down to whites through the existence of chattel slavery that has not been passed down to the descendants of slaves. Nonetheless, even in the Black church, arguably one of the most influential institutions in the Black community, bootstrapping was embraced as the primary way to overcome all obstacles of race, poverty, gender, disenfranchisement, social deviance, and such as defined by America's historically Puritan code of ethics. What emerges in the US is a penal system grounded in a Protestant fundamentalist religious history with a strong sense of right and wrong and a penchant for justifying abuse. According to a book published by renowned African American preacher, a renowned preacher, bootstrapping is a way of taking responsibility for and building your own life while bringing reality to your dreams. You can be kept down only if you don't see those metaphorical boots that offer you a way out of your current predicament. Bootstrappers do not see themselves as victims, but have confidence in their ability to rise beyond the limited expectations that others may have imposed on them. They develop their inner strength from their experience and sufferings, which allows them to persevere even in the face of challenging odds. I once believed every word of that advice. But as I read this book, The Way of the Bootstrapper, inside my cell at a medium security prison in upstate New York, I began to question whether or not the author, who had been a member of Congress for 11 years before writing the book, was aware of his own privilege. By the end of his term in Congress, he had built a religious institution with more than 15,000 members and constructed a $23 million 93,000 square foot cathedral, and as a member of the Appropriations Committee in Congress, directed hundreds of millions of federal dollars to revive the community in which the cathedral is located. While these were all great things for the community, I would argue that privilege was at play here, and not just sheer determination. It became apparent that this pastor had a pretty reliable pair of boots and straps, and that he was also counting on the boots and straps of others to achieve his success. Notwithstanding my faith, my trust in my own abilities, and my belief in personal empowerment and responsibility, the bootstrapper mentality fell flat for me when I encountered the many structural barriers that supersede self-determination. My real education began in 1997, when, despite being raised in a family that believed in my personal potential, I found myself bootless, strapless, and in prison. As I was processed through the criminal system in America on multiple occasions, and in the ensuing journey, I've had experiences in the community focused largely on resistance to criminal punishment, and that has been my means of dealing with complex social issues. A few things became obvious to me, some that I've already mentioned, but I'll mention a little bit more about each of them. And the first one is race. I doubt that there are many in this room who have not heard of and or read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Era of Colorblindness. It hit the ground with unprecedented momentum for a book of its kind. Perhaps it was timing, perhaps it was the brilliant simplicity in which she articulated the complexities of structural racism in the United States. Alexander, a civil rights lawyer, exposes the racism that permeates the criminal justice system at every interaction. from police on the streets to prosecution and access to quality defense, from the courts to sentencing, and even into reintegration. She explains how the war on drugs of Nixon, Reagan, and Clinton has harsh consequences for all of us, but has been particularly dunning to people of color, who, according to Alexander, have been relegated to a caste system that structurally inhibits people of color who have criminal record histories from full citizenship and upward mobility. The argument that mass incarceration is an echo of previous vile forms of racialized social control in the United States is not new. We have known for some time, even before the new Jim Crow, that more African Americans are in correctional control today than were enslaved 10 years before the Civil War. In 2004, more black men were barred from voting than in 1870. Once, poll taxes and literacy tests were used to keep black people from the polls, but today, federal disenfranchisement laws accomplish what poll taxes and literacy tests ultimately could not. Simply put, while people of color make up about 30% of the United States population, they account for more than 60% of those imprisoned. And while the drug war may explain the spike in incarceration rates, it does not on its own account for the vastly disproportionate incarceration and criminalization of people of color. So when we think about criminal punishment in the United States, we should be thinking not just about the sheer numbers, but about who is damaged by this trend and why. Alexander reports that in at least 15 states, blacks are admitted to prison on drug charges at a rate from 20 to 57 times greater than that of white men. Slavery and Jim Crow were overtly racist, but criminalization allows mass incarceration to masquerade as a set of colorblind practices aimed at securing public safety. To be frank, Alexander, once again, was not the first to offer such analysis. To her credit, the popularity of her book has made this analysis more accessible. Thus, today, more of us fully understand the racial implications of mass punishment. The next thing I want to summarize is the connections between poverty and mass incarceration. Poverty levels in America are both a cause and a result of mass incarceration. People need jobs that pay decent wages, offer long-term security and health benefits, and provide a path to upward mobility. Who could be against that? However, it becomes more complex when we consider the Pew Center report that nearly 1 in 100 adults in the United States is behind bars, and the National Employment Law Project estimates that nearly 65 million US residents have a criminal record on file. This leaves them vulnerable to employment discrimination based solely on conviction, no matter how long ago it occurred. A higher minimum wage is a great thing, but it means nothing if jobs are not available to the people who need them most. Any serious effort to reduce poverty by increasing relevant workforce training and academic education must also include a serious effort to provide opportunities to those in prison and to those who are reentering our communities from prison. Even early childhood education is impacted by poverty in relationship to incarceration. It's an investment for millions of children with incarcerated parents. Poverty is much more likely to occur to a child with an incarcerated parent who is at risk of increased homelessness and foster care placement, among many other things. In a 2009 research study conducted by Bruce Weston at Harvard, it was determined that the official poverty rate would have fallen considerably during the period of the early 2000s had it not been for mass incarceration. The only way to reverse this trend and to prevent future damage is to be vigilant about considering the needs of those who have been marked by criminalization and incarceration. I want to talk just for a few minutes now about gender. The numbers of women incarcerated are growing. They have been growing consistently over a number of years at a rate much higher than that of men. And though women are still a relatively small population of those imprisoned, there are other consequences for women. Women, especially in the African American community, have been the primary caretakers of African American incarcerated men. Women experience more parental rights issues because they are likely to be the caretakers of children at the time of incarceration. Women are the only incarcerated population that can be subject to giving birth in shackles while incarcerated, and then have their child ripped from them only months after giving birth, having no control over what happens to that child. I have a good friend who lived through that experience more than 20 years ago and still today cannot talk about it without reliving it. Incarcerated on Rikers Island for a controlled substance sale worth $10. And because of that, had to give birth on Rikers Island and relinquish the care of her son to her mother. Correctional facilities were never built to be gender responsive to women, and so the conditions for women are deplorable and violent and discriminatory in many prisons across this country. We also know that prisons create an environment of political oppression. When we think of Martin Luther King and the Freedom Riders, the bus boycotters who were jailed for standing up for their political beliefs, when we think of Assata Shakur and Angela Davis, we know that when those who are oppressed get out of their place, so to speak, they are punished with the threat of criminalization. I have a story I want to tell, and I actually had a prop in my purse, but pretend my prop is here when I say the prop is here. So my mom was an activist during the 1960s, and she used to tell me stories all the time about being an activist. The first thing I remember from the 60s was the day Martin Luther King was shot. I remember that vividly. But a whole lot of stuff happened before then. And my mom told me the story of the first political action she ever took. So I told you we lived in this wealthy community, but we had this one block where the people of color lived, and they were all laborers or domestic workers for the wealthy families. Eventually, my mother moved into a different type of work. My father was a construction worker. But there was one truck route through our little town, and the truck route came right through our neighborhood. And there was no stoplight on the corner between the main boulevard and our street. And young people had to cross that street every day to get to the school that was up the hill. I wasn't even in school yet, but my mother organized a protest for all the mothers in the community that did have children in school. And she said that I participated in my first protest at the age of 4, when holding her hand and holding the hands of all of the other mothers and children in the community, we blocked off the main boulevard so the trucks couldn't get through. That was my mom. And that's where I get my penchant for political activism. It reminds me of how many of us have been disenfranchised at some time in our life because of mass punishment. 48 states and the District of Columbia prohibit voting while incarcerated. 35 states prohibit persons on parole from voting, and 31 of these states exclude persons on probation as well. 4 states deny the right to vote to all persons with felony convictions even after they have completed their sentence. 8 others disenfranchise certain categories of people with criminal convictions. Each state has developed its own process of restoring rights, but most of these restoration processes are so cumbersome that relatively few people can take advantage of them. And in my purse, I have an old, beat-up registration card from 1958, from the day my mom turned 21. I found it when I was packing up her belongings after her death. And I remember the day that I told my mother that I was going to prison. And the first words out of her mouth were not, "Oh, you're gonna lose your job, you're gonna lose your apartment, I'm gonna miss you." The first words out of her mouth were, "Are you ever gonna be able to vote again?" And every time I look at that voter registration card, I remember those words, and I understand the power of the vote. Today, even with courage, it is unnerving for me to walk inside a prison. I'm not afraid of the men or women in the orange or green jumpsuits, and I'm not afraid of the officers in their gray or blue uniforms. I am harassed by the invisible presence known as the spirit of punishment. So I want to talk a little bit about religion now. A great book written by T. Richard Snyder called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Punishment calls punishment part of the air we breathe. In 1976, California struck the word rehabilitation from its criminal code and passed a law categorically stating that the purpose of imprisonment is punishment. He confronts the spirit of punishment that floods our culture and its lethal effects on today's penal system and our society. Now, I visited a prison in Graterford, Pennsylvania, maximum security prison. And for those of you who know anything about prisons or have talked to people in prison, many people in prison signify prison as kind of a death and release as sort of a resurrection. I went to this event at Graterford Prison, and a group of incarcerated men who had developed a theory they refer to as the culture of street crime did a performance. And part of that performance was a spoken word piece in which a gentleman performed a monologue about his whole life, reliving every mistake he had ever made. And at the end of every verse was a refrain. That refrain was, "It's all my fault. It's all my fault. It's all my fault." And while others applauded, I wanted to cringe. I wanted to acknowledge his pain and his courage. I wanted to apologize to him for a society in which the cumulative denial of human rights has emasculated 8 generations of Black men and now expects them to perform social compliance as if unaffected by their historical trauma. I wanted to jump up and rescue him by saying, "No, son, no. It really isn't all your fault." This is not to say that personal accountability is a non-factor. To be answerable to oneself from a psychological perspective and to one's God from a spiritual perspective promotes healing and liberates one from a kind of deep-seated shame. But punishing, strictly from an accountability approach, assumes an evil person who, of his own free will, intentionally acts against those rules. This approach falls short when we acknowledge for a person who exists as a frustrated outsider on the fringes of a dominant socioeconomic culture, unemployed, inadequately educated, living in substandard housing, lacking health care, enduring police harassment, and excluded from the political process. If people don't have hope, access, support, a sense of community and fairness, and a guarantee of certain human rights, how can we expect them to conform to a structure that has no regard for their lives? The freeing power of education. In prison, I became aware of the educational disparities among the women incarcerated with me. Though I had the advantage of having lived in an affluent community with an excellent public school system, most of the women in prison with me had only had access to poor quality or little education. They had not failed to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They had been left barefoot by lack of access to quality educational resources. In my prison job as a peer educator in adult basic education and high school equivalency classes, I began seeing with fresh eyes the criminal justice system, the public education system, and the racial stratifications that were not previously apparent to me. All the women I was tutoring were women of color, mostly from poor backgrounds. Hearing them talk about the scarcity of resources in their local schools, their inability to navigate bureaucratic systems on behalf of their children in public schools, and the realities of community trauma caused by over-policing, addiction, unemployment, and discrimination made me consider the relationship between access to education and mass incarceration. I saw that these women were not incapable of learning. On the contrary, many of them had never been challenged. Some had obvious learning difficulties that were never addressed, and many had never been encouraged to perform well in the classroom. Some had even been told more about their limitations than about their potential. Having flunked out of college once myself in the 1980s, I never thought myself qualified to teach anybody anything. In prison, however, I learned just how privileged I was. I grew up in an area with great resources, and I had the privilege of an excellent secondary education. And tutoring thus made me feel both valued and ashamed. Valued because I was helping people I really cared about, and ashamed because I had, in my mind, wasted the wonderful opportunity afforded me in my youth. When I left prison and found college and community fellowship, and returned to college with their support, I began a journey to try to figure out how we could, as a community of formerly incarcerated women, create an environment where education led us to a better understanding of our place in the world and our ability to lead. How, linked together hand in hand, we could stretch across that boulevard of lack of access to education and demand opportunity for ourselves and for our sisters who were still incarcerated. The 15 women who I started college and community fellowship with as a student, we're still very close friends, all incredibly powerful, successful, politically conscious, and involved in social justice movements. We have amongst ourselves a homegrown social capital that spans from career advice to personal support, but not enough people in prison or upon release from prison have that opportunity. There are undeniable links between education and social capital. There is a reason that Harvard has a club. There is a reason that Yale has a club, because there is where you find fellows who can introduce you to opportunities become part of your community, help you in the labor market, have conversations with you where you critically think about our political situation, social roles, and religion. It helps put challenges in the context of structural realities as well as individual circumstances. When you have a community that is around you, offering hope, you are much less likely to try to find hope in ways that are outside the social contract. History confirms it. Education has always been a principal source of upward mobility for people of color in America. Frederick Douglass said, "Knowledge is the pathway from slavery to freedom." From the time he was taught to read at the age of 12, we have known that education is power and freedom. And from that time, we have also known that denying education is a pathway to oppression, suppression, poverty, and prison. As some level of post-secondary education becomes absolutely necessary for living wage employment, incarcerated people have been virtually expelled from higher education by being made ineligible for Pell Grants at the federal level while they're incarcerated, and also ineligible for state grants, including here in New York. CCF is working along with our partners at Just Leadership USA to eliminate those barriers. These collateral consequences were enacted purely as a means of punishment, part of the air we breathe, and to emphasize the separation between people with criminal history records and law-abiding citizens. In stark contrast to laws that have been enacted for the purpose of increasing public safety, the denial of funding for education became law despite overwhelming evidence that access to education drastically increases public safety. There's a lot of statistics about crime on campus being committed mostly by young people entering college for the first time who've never had a criminal history. Yet, almost every college in the United States asks about criminal history upon application. Because racial disparities permeate every aspect of criminal punishment, and the use of conviction status to deny education funding to qualified students in prison, to bar admission to college, it has a disproportionate negative impact on communities of color and the poor. This practice adds to the already existing damage caused by a new divide in America, in which criminal record discrimination has replaced the blatant race-based discrimination that the civil rights movement aimed to dismantle. Before I end, it is imperative that we honor the voices and the hopes and desires of those who bear the mark of criminal punishment. From this, I draw on my own experience, my relationships with close-knit community of directly impacted friends and colleagues, and the work at CCF. And I can tell you this about us who bear the mark, who bear the scarlet letter, that we want to be described by something other than a list of failures and deficiencies. No one is more aware of our mistakes, failures, and shortcomings than we are. The concept of personal responsibility is not foreign to us. In fact, it often propels us. That is why many of us who manage to obtain adequate education despite the odds enter professions that serve the public good in myriad ways, whether it's being a drug counselor or a housing counselor or running an organization to build leadership among the formerly incarcerated, or running an organization to help people go back to college. We enter those professions because we believe that we have an obligation to our brothers and sisters. We'd like to be known for that, for our potential, our competence, and our desire to serve. This is not what the public, which has been jaded by sensationalized media portrayals, imagines us to be. However, I can assure you that the vast majority of people who are released from prison or who narrowly escape prison by being sentenced to an alternative do not leave that system, the jail, the courtroom, and think, I think I'll do that again. Most have a sincere desire to turn the tides and get on the path to a better future. What is lacking is not desire, but adequate opportunity, support, and access to social capital. We want our fellow citizens to care about what happens to us beyond subsistence and criminal desistance. To justify increased access to education, I often have conversations with officials who want to frame it in terms of public safety, employability, and public cost savings, all very important things. But the value of education and its power to free extends far beyond these. Indeed, education is a powerful path to individual transformation and vastly improves one's ability to deal with the challenges of life. But it is also the window to self-awareness and awareness of one's place in a free society. Public safety is a natural outcome of an educated population, but it should not be the justification for providing education. Put simply, education is not just a means to a series of positive ends, but an end unto itself. Education, on its own merit, is worth pursuing, worth having, and worth supporting. Finally, we want access to this freeing education, not just so we can survive, but so that we can thrive and lead. People in prison instinctively know that education is a pathway to power and freedom. That if we can find that pathway, the likelihood that we will achieve every other type of positive outcome is dramatically increased. Education helps people lead. And in challenging political environments, we need leaders. The need for those who have experienced mass incarceration and criminalization to play key leadership roles in the decarceration movement is evident in the personal experiences of many people who have criminal record histories. Some are in this room today. It is essential that there be autonomous organizing among women and men in and beyond prisons, in collaboration with various other leaders. This does not mean separating from the larger society. Instead, it means creating opportunity to align with others who might share interest in social, political, and economic change. Without the meaningful participation of directly involved individuals at the highest level of reform efforts, the United States faces a future mired in the fundamentally unjust criminal punishment system. Until a radical, theoretical understanding of justice prevails, reforms will only be marginal and, in the long run, susceptible to quick reversal. So I feel tonight like I've come full circle, and I'll tell you why. I was released in 2001, and in 2002, I got a phone call from the 10th annual roundtable on women in prison. It was the first time I had been asked to speak about my prison experience, and guess where the 10th annual roundtable on women in prison was held? Here at Columbia University. I was asked to read something I'd written while incarcerated, and I think it's really appropriate for me to come full circle and read that to you tonight. When I'm done, there'll be time for questions, so prepare your thoughts, and there's microphones here in the aisle to line up. This is called Lights Out. 11 at night, my cell is locked tight. You all are sleeping. Alone, I am creeping, weeping and peeping. I'm up all night. Sleep I must fight, for if I sleep, grisly thoughts seep into my mind deep, and nightmares leap. My weary eyes weep, for in my sleep, walkie-talkies beep, and guards in a jeep are creeping and peeping. Blood they are seeking, pain they are heaping, but you are still sleeping while I am reaping the life I've been keeping. Wake up. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hi.
I interviewed your family.
Ellie?
Yes.
Ellie Shodell?
Yes.
Hi.
And I'm telling you the pride that your mother would take in tonight's event. When I read about this, my heart just stopped. And I had to come and see you from Port Washington, the unnamed suburb, which is still segregated. But Vivian, you do us so proud. You've got to come out to the library. We have all the transcripts of your family. That is truly, I think, where your heart comes from. And I'm just gobsmacked about how wonderful is the work that you have done. So I'll come kiss you at the thing there, but I just wanted to.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you so much.
Hi, how are you?
Hi,
My name is
how are
Mike.
you?
I'm a high school teacher in the South Bronx, and I just wanted to get your opinion on the role of charter schools in this, because it's obviously a very controversial thing. I myself am a teacher at a charter school, and I wanted just to hear your opinion.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on charter schools. I believe that every school should be meeting the needs of our community. And to the extent that charter schools have offered opportunity to some people who would otherwise not have gotten it, I'm not opposed to charter schools, but I think the real solution is to invest in public education broadly.
My name is Susan Purdy, and I once taught classes at Bedford Hills Correctional. The reason I walked in late today was because I was over at the Union Theological Seminary, where Sarah Bennett, who's a civil rights lawyer and advocate for incarcerated men and women, was hosting a panel after we wandered around a bit looking at the photography that she had displayed of women who had been released from prison. Mm-hmm. Some as recently as the last couple of years, and one about 10 years ago. I guess the reason I'm standing here was simply to say that at this small meeting of people, all of whom would have been here if they hadn't been there, and many of you would have been there if you weren't here. I tried to be in both places. But at this meeting were 4 or 5 women from Bedford Hills, all of whom had been educated inside, all of whom had stories to tell about what education had meant to them. And sitting in the audience, in addition, was Elaine Lord, who was the superintendent of Bedford Hills, who was responsible for the foundation of the college program there many years ago. Mm-hmm. So here we have, just a few blocks up the street, the stories of 5 women, all of whom were educated inside and for whom it's made a huge difference. So hats off to CCF, hats off to you, Vivian, and to everybody in the room who's involved in any way at all in education and the helping women who are now on the outside. I say bravo, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Michelle Truzino. I'm an advisor here at the School of Professional Studies, and along with being an advisor here, I teach and I coach public speaking to high school students in Brooklyn and Queens at the public school level, charter, as well as private school. And first and foremost, it was a privilege to be in attendance this evening and hear your personal accounts as well as your overall reaction to incarceration. Really honored to be here today. Something that stuck out for me, and I'm sorry if I get emotional, is that you said that those who have been incarcerated wear a scarlet letter and they're described for their failures. And what I would like to know, being an educator and one who is involved in higher education, is what resources are available for the children of those who are incarcerated who also feel that they bear this scarlet letter for bearing something that isn't their personal consequence.
That's a great question, and there's wonderful work being done around that. The Osborne Association is the at the forefront of that work about destigmatizing children of the incarcerated. As this idea has become popular even in the mainstream. Sesame Street came out with a series talking about what it's like to be the child of an incarcerated parent. The more that we talk about it and destigmatize the experience of incarceration, the better chance the children of the incarcerated will have. When I was growing up, whenever my cousin, I had a cousin who was in and out of prison all the time. We never really knew it until we got in our teens and figured it out, but when we were little kids, we were told he was away at school. So hiding the truth is not the answer. Talking about it and being open about it and destigmatizing is the key.
Hi, my name is Michelle, and I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
I was just kind of surprised to find out recently that you mentioned that you had come here at the end of your circle here at Columbia to speak at the round table, and I was just very surprised to find out recently that even Columbia today still asks student applicants for their criminal history. And I wanted to know what your sort of thought is on why that is still the case, how they still justify asking those questions of people who want to come here for study.
So I'll tell you a story about when we first had a conversation with the SUNY trustees and the SUNY council about the question on their application. So one of my partners, I think it was Glenn. Is Glenn here? Well, one of my partners, Glenn Martin, asked the SUNY council, well, if you do you have any evidence that asking this question increases public safety on SUNY campuses? And the council said no. And so Glenn said, well, then why do you ask? And the answer was the optics, that it makes the parents of applicants feel safe.
Hi, my name is Kenlon Tyree. I want to first thank you for coming here to share your experience and your knowledge. And I want to say, so during the civil rights movement, the church had a huge impact on furthering the movement. And I want to know, as a pastor, how do you feel of the role of the church today and the various social injustices going on?
So I'm not a pastor, I'm an ordained minister. There's a big difference. So I'm not in charge of a congregation. But the church has various strains within it. During the civil rights movement, the church was very active in the fight for justice. They have not been as active in the fight against mass incarceration, but they're coming along. But the church is very much steeped in that Puritan narrative of personal responsibility and accountability. So their involvement with prison is very much grounded in going into prisons to save people, so to speak. They're coming along. I spent my 2 years as a Soros Justice Fellow actually doing work with churches to get them to understand the structural issues surrounding incarceration. It's going to take some time and some education, but that bootstrapper mentality that I talked about is still very much part of the narrative.
Hi, Vivian.
Hi.
My name is Grant Valentine. It's good to see you still haven't fatigued in your contributions to this community. The question I have, you mentioned a little bit about the over-policing of communities, and some of the things that are taking place in communities that cause the incarceration rates. My question is, when you look at those who are being released from prisons, the second chance citizens, and their educational profiles where they have second and third grade reading levels, dropped out of 6th and 7th grade, those barriers are difficult for them to continue into higher education. Certainly, the SUNY board has taken that box off their application, but there's other barriers that prevent them from going into higher education, which we know that once they go into higher education, they're much more successful. So in terms of helping those students instill a segregated communities, understanding that education is a human right, how would you want to address those kind of questions?
So at CCF, we address those issues in the initial conversations we have with potential students, because not everybody's ready to go to college. People find their own paths. But I have seen people who would score very low on a score sheet saying, will this person be successful in college, be successful? One of my really good friends entered the classroom for the first time after 25 years and got her associates and was so moved and inspired by her ability to do that, went back and got her bachelor's degree. So I believe in the potential of every human being, and so give people a try. What we do is give people the education they need to understand what it is to go to college, what that means in terms of their time, what it means in terms of their resources. And when they're ready to make the decision and give it a try, we are there to support them. Now, a lot of reentry organizations support people in other ways, and all of that is very important. But every human being, in my opinion, has the potential to be educated at a level above where they already are.
Do you see mentoring as playing a role in that?
Mentoring does play a role. We have a formal mentoring program on the inside at Taconic and Bedford Hills. Our mentoring in our community environment on the outside is much more informal, but it works. It works really well. There are times when, I remember when I was going to school at the same time as one of my really good friends who's here tonight, we both were about to quit because we were failing statistics. We leaned on each other when times were rough. And when her son was facing incarceration as a teenager, all of us supported her so she could stay in school even though she was going through this traumatic period in her life. Social capital means a great deal. That's what people find on a college campus, and that's the environment we create at College and Community Fellowship.
Thank you, Reverend Nixon. Thank you so much. It was an honor and a pleasure to hear you tonight.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm a student with the School of Professional Studies. I'm studying for my Master of Science in Narrative Medicine, and I am a sleep activist, advocating for healthy sleep as a basic human right, as basic and important as any of our other rights. Do you have any? Is there any work being done in this way with the community trauma that has befallen
trauma is a huge part of the incarceration experience.
Yes.
I have a friend who just finished his dissertation at Hunter about trauma and incarceration. There are organizations around the country that CCF is working with to be more trauma informed in our work. And that includes everything from office space design to, making people feel safe when they come into your space. So it is a growing field. Stephanie Covington is kind of at the head of it. We're going to a training in June. So yes, there is work being done around the relationship to incarceration and trauma.
Thank you. I'll investigate that more. And thank you in particular for your poem, which included sleep,
Thank you.
Hi, Vivian.
Hi.
I never tire from hearing from you. And
Thank you, Douglas.
Just a question I wanted to ask, and you said this and talked about this a lot in different venues, most recently at the Aspen Ideas Festival, and it's a debate that rages a lot around issues of college and prison, and that is the debate of whether they should be on the track to vote tech or whether they should be involved in a liberal arts education. So just your thoughts about that, since that's a debate that rages quite a bit.
Oh, I've actually shortened my answer to that question because I get it so much. And my answer is that freedom means choice.
Okay, that sounds good.
Hi, Vivian. So my name is Selena Fulford, and I am a...
Hi, Selena.
Hi. I am a college and community fellowship fellow, alumni. And thank you. Wow, I'm getting applauded and I didn't even say anything yet. So I just want to thank you, Vivian, and thank CCF. Since I came home, I got so much support from CCF and they encouraged me to pursue higher education. I mean, to the point where I have earned 3 master's degrees. So now they're encouraging me to stop because I'm going to owe a lot of money. So now I'm actually pursuing law school. I'm in the process of trying to apply for law school. And so what I wanted to say, what's so important about CCF for me is that when I went to prison, I lost my son to the foster care system. And about 3 weeks ago, I got a call from CCF saying that there's a young man emailing us saying that he thinks that you're his mother. And sure enough, he was looking for me and he Googled my name and he said my name came up with CCF and the theater group. And so he's seen all these pictures of me performing with the theater group, and his wife said, "That's your mother. You look just like that lady, that's your mother." And lo and behold, CCF called me, and they gave me his contact information, and I contacted him, and it was my son. So I want to thank you.
I think we have the 2 last questions. Thank you, George.
All right, good night. Hi, my name is Kenrick Miller. So my question is, we talked a lot about education tonight and the freeing power of education on the outside, but what about on the inside? So when you're in the actual system, in the penal system, what is your take on the education in the system, like while you're in there, what's the educational resources or that sort of thing that's to sort of help to enlighten you to get to that stage of realizing, education is the freeing power. So what is your take on that?
Right, so I mentioned briefly that Pell Grant eligibility was taken away from incarcerated students. That happened in 1994, and ever since then, people have been working really hard to get the federal government to reverse the ban on Pell Grants. There are college programs in prisons around the country that are operated by private dollars. One of the most well-run and famous is the Barred Prison Initiative that operates in several prisons here in New York State and has sites in other schools around the country. But the population of people in prison is so large that it's not sustainable to do it just with private funding. So we are actively advocating for the restoration of Pell Grant eligibility to incarcerated students so that schools will have at least the tuition paid for if they decide to go into prisons and teach credit-bearing classes.
Thank you.
Hi, I was just wondering, you know, we call it like the rehabilitation system, and people get out of prison, but it seems they are still robbed of a lot of citizenship. I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about like not being able to vote, and maybe if there's any end in sight in getting that to be a federal system where we can get people who go through and are, quote, rehabilitated to actually be able to regain their full citizenship. Yeah.
So voting is a state's issue. You're talking about tremendous change, and I have no way of even estimating how far out we are from there. My hope is that we just don't roll backwards in the next 4 years. Right now, even the states that deny people the right to vote have some process in place that you can regain your right to vote, but it's often really cumbersome, sort of like the poll taxes and literacy tests of yesteryear. We're hoping that states make that easier. In my view, incarceration doesn't make you a non-citizen, so I don't understand why everybody can't vote, but we're a long way from that, I have to tell you. Thank you once again for being here. Thank you very much.